all counsel, wisdom, and understanding. We then, unworthy servant here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, and to direct and guide us in all our consultations, and grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estate within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Be seated, please. The Honourable House now resume its sittings. Call of the roll.
Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chan, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Darrell Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malahoo-Fort, Mr. Spencer, Mr. Green, Mr. Terlong, Mr. Main, Mr. Arscott, Mr. Azan, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brownberg, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Leslie Campbell, Mr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Ms. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Mr. Kellier, Dr. McNeil, Ms. Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redmond, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Reverend Thwaites, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Wright, Mr. Golding,
Statements by ministers.
Mr. Speaker, as we all are aware, today we will be hearing from our Prime Minister. Who will respond to all that has been said in this Honourable House over the past few weeks and enlighten the nation as to the way forward. Mr. Speaker, it is also intended that at notices of motion we will give notice of our intention to lay on the table of the House an act to amend the Human Employment and Resource Training Act. In addition, at public business, an act to amend the Local Governments Act will be taken by the Minister of Local Government.
Announcements. Members, before we proceed, I wish to acknowledge the presence of a number of officials, ambassadors, former Member of Parliament and senators and ministers, officials from various ministries, family and friends of members of the House. I want you to welcome them, please. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: annual reports and audited financial statements of the Independence Park Limited IPL for the years 2012-13 and 2013-14.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally. Minister Samuda.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, he will move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Human Employment and Resource Training Amendments Act 2019.
Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Minister Williams.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Information and Communications Technology Authority Act 2019.
Bill shortly entitled the Local Governance Amendment Act 2016, read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill.
Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. Mr. Speaker, Minister. Standing in my name at item number 2 under government business on the order paper, a bill which I'd like to be referred to and examined by a joint select committee of this Parliament. Today I'd like to name the members of this Honourable House who will sit on the committee. But before this can be done, Mr. Speaker, the bill must be read a second time. So I now ask that the bill entitled An Act to Amend the Local Governance Act and to provide for connected matters be now read a second time. The bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? As of it. Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Local Governance Act and to provide for connected matters read a second time.
Mr. Speaker, I now move, be it resolved, that the bill entitled An Act to Amend the Local Governance Act and to provide connecting matters be referred to a select committee comprising the following members: Honourable Desmond McKenzie, Honourable Clifford E. Warmington, Dr. Andrew Wheatley, Mr. Fitzjackson, MP, Mr. Colin Fagan, MP, to sit jointly with a similar committee to be appointed by the Senate to consider and report on the bill shortly entitled Local Governance Amendment Act 2016. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? As of it.
Mr. Speaker, and I wish to invite you to ask the Prime Minister to make his presentation to this Honourable House.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable members, senators and former members seated in the well, excellencies of the diplomatic corps, His Worship the Mayor of Kingston, and other mayors and councillors present, chairpersons and board members of public bodies, Jamaicans here listening and watching, and Jamaicans in the diaspora listening, watching, and following on all forms of media. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen in the gallery, thank you for joining me today in this very important ritual of our democracy, the reading of the budget. This is my 4th budget presentation in this term of my administration. In preparing to speak to you today, I have had a chance to honestly reflect on the performance of this government and to self-assess my own stewardship of your affairs. I want to assure you that I do not need the opposition to tell me that there are challenges. I am the first to admit that there is room for improvement. However, I can also stand here confidently to say to you today, without fear of contradiction, that this government has done a much better job of managing the affairs of the people than any government that the opposition has ever formed. The fact is, even with challenges, which we acknowledge, there has never been a period in the history of Jamaica where the affairs of the country has been so managed that we can report 4 consecutive budgets where these budgets are either revenue neutral, no net new taxes, or a reduction in taxes. Even more, I cannot recall a budget where there has been a net give back of taxes of this magnitude. Overall, my assessment is that the government has performed well. All that has been achieved has been done through collective work and sacrifice of the people of Jamaica, alongside the effort of leadership. And God has granted the increase. God has been good to Jamaica. We have been spared exogenous shocks and major disasters. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 continues to inspire me. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. We are not here to celebrate. We're not here to boast. We're here to give thanks. And to commit to doing even more. We are here today to tell the people of Jamaica about the plans and progress we are making to prosper them. Plans to give them hope and a better future. Plans for building a new Jamaica. Plans and progress to prosper Jamaicans. Plans and progress to secure Jamaica and the peace of our communities. Plans and progress to secure housing for Jamaicans. Plans and progress for our energy security. Plans and progress for our national economy and your personal economic independence through employment. Plans and progress for our youth. Plans and progress for the poor and vulnerable. Plans and progress for our roads and water and other infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, I do not seek credit or proclaim to have developed or progressed all these plans myself. I'm just doing my job. Other people, Mr. Speaker, expect to get thanks for doing their jobs. Mr. Speaker, I only come to work. We believe in partnership, and we have a partnership for the prosperity of the people. I want to acknowledge the contribution of the social partnership process and all the people who have been participating in it, the unions, the private sector organizations, the churches, and civil society have all played their role in engendering a national consensus that has been created. A national consensus that has created the space for policy acceptance and for government action. I want to thank each and every person who has been a part of this process and the groups they represent for their work in previous iterations of the social partnerships, as well as the current Partnership for a Prosperous Jamaica. The social partnership mechanism deserves recognition for its support in developing consensus on important national issues, such as various IMF programs, including pension reform, wage agreements, and debt exchanges executed by successive administrations. They have helped to build consensus on energy diversification. They have helped to build consensus, for example, on the management of the Riverton City dump after the massive 2015 fire. And recently, Mr. Speaker, they have helped to build consensus on the demarcation of the cockpit country. On behalf of this administration, I want to say thanks to the people who have served on the social partnership. Mr. Speaker, I point out the social partnership because there is a request that when it comes to the matter of crime, that we should seek to build some form of new social consensus around crime. And I reflected on that position declared by the leader of the opposition when he spoke, asking us to go and meet with all groups. Mr. Speaker, the recognized formal process for building social consensus that has been practiced by both governments is the social partnership. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, that there is any dissonance in this country around uniting against crime and violence. The only dissonance is on that side. I am always willing to meet and to discuss, but I am not going to give, Mr. Speaker, any cover for obfuscation, any cover to escape the responsibility for the decision that that side took that has put the lives of many Jamaicans at risk. Mr. Speaker, I want to acknowledge and thank the chairmen of public bodies and their board members who give freely of their time and energy to ensure that government policy is properly executed within a good governance framework. Many of the successful projects and programs we have announced are generated, executed, and administered through public bodies. Their proper functioning is of paramount importance to our administration. Mr. Speaker, our system of government allows for and relies on the appointment of ministers, and in some instances, the Governor General appoints persons to non-elected offices to oversee the operations of public bodies. Historically, appointments to chairmanship and directorship of public bodies have been viewed as rewards for public loyalty and support, for political loyalty and support. Over the past decade, however, there has been a growing public recognition that there should be minimum standards set for persons who carry out public functions, including directors of public boards. Now, public sector boards, after being appointed, undertake some governance training. In 2017, my cabinet, in keeping with our commitment to public sector reform and improving the governance framework of public bodies, gave approval to the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, then under Minister Audley Shaw, to develop enhanced policy guidelines for the nomination, selection, and appointment of board members of public bodies. These policies were approved by Cabinet in 2018 under Minister Clark. These policies align with the principles articulated in the Corporate Governance Framework for Public Bodies, which was promulgated in 2011 and reviewed in 2012, which clarifies the governance framework within which public bodies must operate and establishes the rules and responsibilities of the board of directors, chairman, and chief executive officer. Boards are the primary decision-making authority of public bodies and are collectively responsible for their governance, strategic management, and oversight. The board itself, the executive directors, and their staff must acknowledge and respect this principle set out in the corporate governance framework. Likewise, the board must acknowledge and respect that the chief executive officer is primarily responsible for the day-to-day operations of the public body. It is important that each person who is part of this framework understand his or her role relative to each other. The new policy for board appointments will strengthen the governance and accountability system of public bodies and facilitate greater probity, efficiency, and transparency in the nomination, selection, and appointment of board members to public bodies. The policy will also provide clarity and certainty on the circumstances in which the tenure of a board will cease and will support institutional knowledge and seamless transitions. Appointments, Mr. Speaker, will remain the responsibility and the prerogative of ministers, for which they are accountable to Parliament. It is to be expected that ministers will take close interest in the process and have confidence in the people they appoint. After all, ministers can pay the ultimate price for the actions of their appointees. By that token, ministers, therefore, need to ensure that the people they appoint are competent and capable of carrying out the responsibilities that are given to them. This is part of the accountability cycle, ensuring that the public has confidence in the people ministers appoint and that the processes are efficient, transparent, and fair. But this process, which is set out in the new policy, also gives the minister the confidence that he is or she is selecting the right person, best qualified, most suited, most competent, that can actually do the job. You know, in our present system, sometimes it appears as if there is a trade-off between confidence and competence. And that in itself, Mr. Speaker, can weaken public administration. What the government must do, and when I say the government, the state, it must ensure that there is a pool of competent people that are vetted and shortlisted from which the minister can choose. In every other function of the minister, there is a state apparatus that helps the minister to exercise his or her discretion. If the minister has authority, for example, to declare an area a housing development, the minister doesn't just get up on his own and say, I'm going to declare that. There is a long process of civil servants going to check, and policy advisors and people going to do surveys, and they come back and advise the minister. But in this exercise of discretion, the Jamaican state has not yet caught up with ensuring that the minister is properly advised. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that there are some persons who would be thinking, putting in this process will somehow eliminate the participation of the average supporter of a political party. Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that that needs to be the case. What needs to happen is that everyone who wants to sit on a public board, whether they are political or not, should have themselves properly briefed, properly trained in the business of governance of the public business. So this is not to in any way deprive anyone of the opportunity to serve. What this is to ensure that persons who serve can actually add value to the process. So, Mr. Speaker, what will happen with this new policy when it is finally implemented, regulations are being developed now, is that each agency will have a competency profile done. That profile will tell the minister what skills are needed to properly run that public body. Then a database of candidates will be developed, and they too will go through a process of vetting. And then, after that is done, a short list is created. And then from that short list, the minister will select. And then, of course, it goes to Cabinet, and Cabinet makes the final decision. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important change in the way in which government does its business. Mr. Speaker, I'm taking the time necessary to highlight elements of this new policy because of its importance to raising the level of governance across the public sector and reducing any ignorance, weakness, or permissiveness to inappropriate conduct or corrupt acts by public boards. Mr. Speaker, poorly run public bodies pose a threat to our economic program and fiscal certainty. Governance, Mr. Speaker, is of macrocritical importance, meaning that its effects are so far-reaching, it extends beyond the boardroom of the poorly run institution to have national impact. Mr. Speaker, to get a better understanding of the size of public bodies relative to the central government, consider that there are 163 public bodies in total. Before this administration, there were 190. 163 public bodies in total. of which 56 are self-financing. They have projected total gross assets of $1,122 billion. They employ 13,398 workers. They will generate revenues of approximately $406.1 billion, from which they will transfer $16.784 billion to the central government, as well as remit special consumption tax and ad valorem tax and corporate taxes of $45.78 billion. Conversely, the central government will support certain public sector bodies with approximately $17.1 billion. Public bodies are forecasted this year to increase their capital expenditure from $58.48 billion last year to $71.93 billion this new financial year coming. This equals, and we should pay attention to this, this amount equals the $72.1 billion which is projected to be spent by the central government. So public bodies spend in capital expenditure almost the same as central government. Total public bodies expenditure for the new fiscal year is projected at $443.97 billion, while the central government will spend a total of $803.24 billion. In other words, the public bodies are half the footprint of central government when it comes to their expenditure. Mr. Speaker, public sector bodies are more than half the size of central government's expenditure footprint and just as large as central government's capital expenditure footprint. The government cannot leave the governance of these agencies to chance, as any mismanagement or governance failure in the public bodies can have devastating effects on our fiscal accounts. We have experienced that before when loss-making public bodies contributed significantly to the national debt. This government will ensure that our public bodies are run properly. Our hands are firmly on the steering wheel of public bodies governance. Mr. Speaker, this is why I took charge of Petrojam in July 2018. I understood that the issue was of such deep concern to the people of Jamaica that it was up to the Prime Minister to take action and lay a foundation to ensure that the serious governance and management issues that arose did not further exacerbate the difficult market and geopolitical conditions that already threaten the viability of the refinery. These conditions were, first problem, the diversification of electricity generation away from heavy fuel oils. As JPS, the largest single customer of Petrojam, changes out its old generating capacity to more efficient LNG plants, Petrojam will lose approximately US $356 million in sales revenues from the loss of the HFO and ADO business. The next issue that plagued Petrojam long before the governance and management issues came to fore was the obsolescence of the plant. The refinery was designed in 1962, 57 years ago by ESSO. And while the refineries normally have useful life of 25 to 30 years, which can be extended by retooling and ongoing maintenance, the existing plant had surpassed its useful life. And though we have invested, we have done capital improvements and moderate upgrades, the truth is that the technology is old. And so the plant that we are using today to produce our fuels is with old technology, and it will never be as competitive as other refineries with newer technology, no matter how much upgrade we do to it, unless we are going to make that massive upgrade to change the technology of the plant. The other risk which emerged later on, Mr. Speaker, was the increasingly risky geopolitical situation with sanctions on Venezuela, our joint partner. On August the 14th, 2006, a joint venture agreement was signed between the PCJ, Petrojam, and PDV Caribe to cooperate in the ownership and management of Petrojam and to undertake the refinery upgrade, which was recognized as critically important to the energy security of Jamaica. In August 2007, 49% of the shares of Petrojam were acquired by Venezuela. However, the purpose of the agreement, which was to upgrade the refinery, was never fulfilled. In August 2017, sanctions imposed on Venezuela by the United States, which had an indirect negative effect on countries like Jamaica, whose refinery was partially owned by a Venezuelan government company, it became increasingly difficult for Petrojam to do business with its banks, insurers, and suppliers who were concerned about the risk of fines as a result of the sanctions. The fourth challenge that Petrojam faced was the change in fuel specification by the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, from as far back as 2008, adopted a resolution applicable in July 2010 to progressively reduce sulfur and other emissions from marine engines and ships. Petrojam could lose its bunkering market on January 1, 2020 due to the implementation of related regulation. Mr. Speaker, what would have happened if, for some reason, Petrojam could not do business? There would be a massive fall-off in revenue. This would mean that Petrojam, instead of being a net remitter, and Petrojam, just for the record, gives between $2 billion and $5 billion in income taxes to the government's coffers, and remits $43 billion in SCT and ad valorem taxes. What would happen to its employees if, for some reason, any of these conditions impacted Petrojam in such a way that it couldn't do business? The government would have to come in and pick up the tab. The government would have to foot the bill. And I want that to seep in, because the conversation that has gone on is as if there was no threat of the viability of Petrojam. Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear that the possibility, the eventuality of Petrojam becoming a loss-making entity because it could not do business, that possibility was never contemplated in our economic plan.
Prime Minister, could you take a rest while I advise the leader of government business that time for speaking has expired and he should seek to extend. Mr. Senator, before you do so, you give me an opportunity to welcome Ambassador Saunders, Cabinet Secretary and Permanent Secretary, and President and Deputy President of the Senate, and other ministers who have joined us. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that the Most Honourable Prime Minister's time be extended sufficient to enable him to complete his presentation.
Those in favour? Those against? As of it. Prime Minister, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. For consistency and understanding of the point, Mr. Speaker, I will repeat 2 lines before I was broken. Mr. Speaker, to be clear, the eventuality, the possibility of Petrojam becoming a loss-making entity was never contemplated in our economic plan. And, Mr. Speaker, government's support of Petrojam, if it became a loss-making entity, given our IMF agreement, could not be justified, regardless of the persuasive calls that would come from some sections of the society. The risk, the fiscal risk, that Petrojam could become a loss-making entity, Mr. Speaker, is real. That is the possibility of a call on the budget that is unplanned, larger than the contingency, and forces the government to increase debt or raise taxes, often in a long-term manner. Mr. Speaker, that is what we call a fiscal risk. We have been there before when politically sensitive public bodies and even private operations have forced the government to take on more debt than we had planned and which we could not afford. We could start with the banking crisis of the 1990s, which saw the socialization of private debt onto the public debt with FinSAC, with the absorption of debt from the National Water Commission, with the absorption of debt from Clarendon Aluminium Products, CAP, from absorption of debt from the Sugar Company of Jamaica, the absorption of debt from Air Jamaica and other loss-making entities. Mr. Speaker, we are not traveling this road again. Too often, we have allowed public bodies to be run in a manner where there is not just lack of accountability, but lack of adherence to good fiscal policies. And these poor decisions that public bodies make ultimately become national problems, because some of these public bodies are too big to fail. So its institution is run poorly. At the end of the day, they come to the Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Finance can't tell them no, because Jamaica needs gas in the car, and Petrojam is what is going to produce it. Or you need water, and NWC is what is going to produce it. And what that does is force the government to take on debt that it didn't plan for. And before you know it, you have a debt to GDP ratio of 141%. Mr. Speaker, we are not traveling that road again. In all instances of public bodies and private operations becoming fiscal risks, there has been an element of poor governance, either at the ministerial level or at the board level. Usually, the governance failure is around poor risk management and lack of awareness of the corporate, technological, regulatory, and geopolitical environment in which the public body operates, and how changes in these spheres create threats and opportunities that impact operations now and in the future, coupled with a failure to act in a timely manner. The failures of Petrojam did not occur overnight or even over 3 years. Having taken charge of Petrojam for 8 months, I'm pleased to report that we have taken specific and systemic corrective actions, and Minister Williams will take forward many of those actions. Mr. Speaker, it is because I understand how deeply people have felt about Petrojam issues that I'm going into details about the actions taken regarding its governance. I and my administration feel deeply and therefore believe it important that Parliament and the people of Jamaica should keep the facts in the front of their mind. Sometimes the facts get lost in the debate. In July 2018, I reconstituted the board of Petrojam with Mr. Paul Ho, former chairman of Supreme Ventures, one of the largest companies in Jamaica, as chairman of Petrojam, and Ms. Rosie Pilner and Mr. Wayne Powell, both former vice presidents of a major bank, as directors. In light of the great and justified public concerns that had arisen, I gave the board general directions to, 1, settle the industrial relations environment and return the company to full management strength to ensure efficiency and effective operations. To return the refinery to full operations in the shortest possible time as a matter of urgency. You may recall that at that time, the refinery was down for routine maintenance, but that routine maintenance lasted for an extended period and it affected the supply of bitumen for asphalt. And third, to examine the management systems, including accounting, administrative, procurement, and human resource management, for weakness and make the necessary changes both in systems and personnel to ensure the effective operations of the company in the short term. We have introduced new policy guidelines, Mr. Speaker, and rules that are not only applicable to Petrojam, but to public bodies generally, some of which I have referred to earlier, but I want to go through a few of them, Mr. Speaker. We have now put in place procedures for the travel of board chairmen. Before, it would require the approval of the permanent secretary and the cabinet secretary to travel. The minister does not necessarily have to be informed. Now, for a board chairman to travel, the minister must understand the political risk of the travel, and that should be calculated into the approval process. So now we have changed the rule that for board chairmen to travel, the minister must be informed. That, Mr. Speaker, will improve the governance arrangement across public bodies. No. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we put in place a new procedure for the appointment of board members. Board members, and this will be incorporated into the new procedures, board members must now declare their residential status to the cabinet. Because what was happening, Mr. Speaker, is that ministers would appoint persons, may not even be aware that these persons live overseas. For them to attend board meetings, their travel becomes a cost to the organization. This is not to limit the participation of our diaspora, but at least the cabinet should be aware and consciously make a decision rather than to happen upon that an appointed person resides overseas. That, Mr. Speaker, will improve governance right across the board. Mr. Speaker, we have introduced tighter procedures around the use of retainer contracts. Because, you know, Mr. Speaker, retainer contract is payment for a service not yet provided. So if that is allowed to be used in a general way, that can be a very massive loophole for corrupt acts. This government has put in place new policies around the use of retainer contracts. All such contracts that are not tendered must come to the cabinet for approval. And if there is, and that is regardless of the threshold of those contracts. And board members and executive management must declare any connected party interest when it is brought to cabinet, for cabinet to make a decision as to whether or not this is a retainer contract that the public body should use. Mr. Speaker, we put in place new guidelines for donations. This was another issue that came up. Now, Mr. Speaker, public bodies must declare to the Ministry of Finance their corporate social responsibility budget. Every donation that they make, they must declare it in their annual returns. There is a limit on donations, and agencies whose business it is not to give donations should be passing their donation through the agencies that have that business. It's one thing for someone to come to a massive public body like Petrojam and say, I want to build a school. And Petrojam writes the check. But Petrojam doesn't have any staff to go and supervise, to monitor and evaluate, to see whether or not the money was actually spread properly. What should happen is that that donation should go to an agency that has that functionality. So it should go to Chase, the National Education Trust, the NWA, and they monitor. So that is now the new rule that the Ministry of Finance has been tasked to develop. These are actions, Mr. Speaker, that we have taken to improve the governance of not just Petrojam, but the entire public sector. Mr. Speaker, we have put in tighter guidelines around the use of non-disclosure agreements and confidentiality clauses in HR settlement matters in public bodies. Based on the new guidelines, the form of the non-disclosure agreement and the confidentiality clauses must not fetter the Parliament, and the monetary value of the settlement cannot be the subject of a non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality clause. The public must know the value of the financial payment that is made. The other terms, which are non-financial, can be subject to non-disclosure. But the monetary value must be disclosed, and the Parliament should not be fettered. So the non-disclosure agreement should specifically state that Parliament, the courts, or an authorized agent of the state should not be fettered or prevented from getting this information. Because the truth is, Mr. Speaker, that Parliament also has to obey the law. That's the challenge you have. Parliament also has to respect the sanctity of a contract. We were reminded of that when the opposition, in trying to defend or oppose rather the government's buyback of the Petrojam shares from Venezuela, their argument was the government must respect the sanctity of contracts. That is generally the case. But there is a process by which, if a breach of it is going to happen, that process has to be followed. And Mr. Speaker, what we have put in place in terms of the new procedures eliminates any such future conflict by putting in place these new policy measures. We have improved the governance of our public sector. Mr. Speaker, I have mobilized the JDF Coast Guard to do checks on the harbour floor in and around Petrojam to ensure that there are no mechanisms or apparatus that could be used to illegally abstract fuel from Petrojam. You know, Mr. Speaker, I went to an event in one of our maroon towns, and this gentleman came up to me and he said, "Boss, them have a hose on the floor that run up to Petrojam, and that is where they suck out all the fuel when it comes." People have these very deep beliefs that they are which is why I asked the JDF to go and dive, and they did, and they have reported that they have not found anything that could be a mechanism to illegally abstract fuel. But they also, Mr. Speaker, with the police, conducted various operations in and around the communities around Petrojam, and they have discovered and dismantled various illegal fuel operations. So, Mr. Speaker, we have taken these actions. You would know, Mr. Speaker, that I have ordered a forensic audit into the oil losses, and the draft TOR has been circulated for comments by relevant agencies. Mr. Speaker, the new board has taken several steps. They have reorganized the internal audit of Petrojam. They have introduced now what is called a daily audit process. They have brought in from the parent company 2 auditors from PBCJ to bolster the internal audit strength of Petrojam. They have gone through a detailed review of all contracts issued by Petrojam, particularly contracts that are direct contracting, and they have limited the use of direct contracting. They have established an internal review process for all contracts to ensure that contracts are in keeping with the government's procurement procedures. They have developed a formal terms of reference for the pricing committee to include independent members and a representative from the Ministry of Finance. You will recall, members, that there was great concern about the lack of transparency in how price is set. Well, they have now started to add a transparent and integrous process to how price is set. They have, Mr. Speaker, ensured a close monitoring of oil losses. International benchmarks for oil loss goes up to 0.9%. Petrojam's own internal target is 0.4. On average, since April 2018, Petrojam has been operating at 0.2% average oil loss, which is well within Petrojam's own target. They have re-established a program of oil tank maintenance and accelerated repairs of leakage and seepage. This year, Petrojam will spend approximately $10 million repairing tanks and pumps. They have implemented a real-time management and a rigorous reconciliation process, which includes monthly mass volume balance, which ensures accuracy and effective management of oil levels. So, Mr. Speaker, they're not waiting until end of the month or end of 2 months they discover, oh, we lost this amount of oil. They are doing this, Mr. Speaker, on a regular basis, almost a daily basis in terms of managing the inventory of the stock. Mr. Speaker, they have improved security. They have put in CCTVs and all kinds of other measures which I can't speak about to ensure that there is no pilferage. Mr. Speaker, from an HR point of view, they recognize the instability created in the organization by improper dismissal and hiring practices of former managers and the negative impact this was having on the morale and productivity generally in the industrial relations environment. If this was not quickly addressed, it would have led to more costly and disruptive industrial relations disputes, which would have crippled the organization. The board put in place a process that saw to expeditious resolution of the separation of staff members who were not able to contribute to the restoration of normalcy and improve staff morale in the organization. The board has now reviewed the organizational structures and is studying proposals made to improve the reporting relationships and accountability of the administration. So, Mr. Speaker, this administration, in 8 months, recognizing the governance failures at Petrojam, has put in place a suite of measures that will not only improve the governance of Petrojam, but will also improve the governance of the wider public sector. Mr. Speaker, Petrojam has always had problems, but there has never been a government that has taken the level of action with the speed and sincerity that this government has taken to address the problems at Petrojam. Mr. Speaker, regarding the future of Petrojam, last October, I put in place a review commission to make recommendations for the future of Petrojam as a refinery and to analyze proposals for its upgrade within the context of what is economically and financially best for Jamaica. This would include whether Petrojam should remain a public body. The Petrojam Review Commission has started work with the support of an international consultant, and they should have a report ready for submission to Cabinet in June of this year. Notwithstanding the pending report, I have directed the board and management to ensure that Petrojam continues to pursue opportunities and take decisions that will preserve and enhance the existing value of the business so that whatever decision is made about Petrojam, it will have significant commercial value. Under the fresh guidance of Minister Favour Williams, who I was proud to appoint as the first woman minister with these responsibilities, the board and management of Petrojam are pursuing other opportunities to compensate for the loss in the business from JPS. They are looking to supply countries in CARICOM with HFO. they are looking to source lower sulfur crude so that they can continue to produce HFO and diesel for bunkering, and that they will meet the January 1st, 2020 deadline set for the lower emission standards. Mr. Speaker, preliminary activities for the development of a vacuum distillation unit has begun. This vacuum distillation unit would increase their capacity, that is Petrojam's capacity, in the production of asphalt and create a stronger line of business that will replace the loss of business from HFO. Without question, the most significant action taken by the government in relation to the future viability of Petrojam is the buyback of its shares from PDV Caribbean. Without taking this action, I could not stand here today with confidence to say that Petrojam has a secure future in whatever form we may choose to continue the business. Without that action, credible investment in the refinery would have been limited, if not impossible, to obtain. Without this action, it was clear that Petrojam would have become a fiscal risk and a liability to the government because it would not be able to conduct business with its suppliers, banks, and insurers. Yeah. In fact, Mr. Speaker, such a coincidence that a team from Petrojam had to go to London to speak to their insurers because their insurers advised them that they could not continue to underwrite the insurance for Petrojam. This would mean that Petrojam could not continue to operate. It would be in violation of international rules about how refineries operate. That would just lead to the shutdown of the business. The only reason why they were able to secure insurance is because on the very day they were in London speaking to the insurers, I was standing right here in Parliament passing the bill to take back the shares. It was on that basis that the insurers agreed to continue to underwrite Petrojam. And you would think that there was no risk to Petrojam, that everything was okay if you were to believe the narrative of the opposition. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, today we can take action and make strategic decisions about the energy security of our country without encumbrances. This is what we mean when we say economic independence. Yes. Mr. Speaker, Petrojam has been a great challenge for this administration, no doubt. But we have not hidden from the problem. Where we have found weaknesses, we have acted to correct them. Where there is lack of transparency, we have disclosed. Where personnel are at fault, they have been held accountable or no longer hold office. Mindful that investigations are still ongoing. There is no question now that Petrojam is a stronger and much better run public body now than it was in the past. Mr. Speaker, in April 2013, the Minister of Energy, member from East Kingston and Port Royal, stated, in relation to Petrojam, this project that is well delayed, if Petrojam is not upgraded and expanded, we will have to shut it down. It is as simple as that.
Who said that?
Having acknowledged the serious nature of the risks facing Petrojam, the government then did not act decisively to secure resolution of the upgrade issue with our joint venture partners. Indeed, their failure or fear to act could have led to the closure of Petrojam. Not my words, the words of the then minister. Today, we can be satisfied that this government acted fairly and appropriately to secure Petrojam's value for the benefit of the people of Jamaica, whatever we decide to do with it. Mr. Speaker, having addressed in some detail the different matters of current interest related to Petrojam, it is also important that I touch briefly on some matters regarding our friends, Venezuela. Mr. Speaker, in 2011, I flew to Caracas to attend the launch of the Community of Latin America and Caribbean States. CELAC. There I met with the late Hugo Chavez. We exchanged gifts. I gave him a copy of the famous Jamaica letters, which was written by the great liberator Simon Bolivar while he was exiled here in Jamaica in 1815. And Chavez gave me a painting of Simon Bolivar, which I believe I still maintain in my very limited collection of paintings. It was a gift, personal gift. Yeah, in fact, I got two gifts. I got that, and I got a set of Venezuelan coins and stamps. Mr. Speaker, I believe a few of them were. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, we had a wonderful conversation. There is no question about the personality that Hugo Chavez was and his incredible charisma to the point where they have coined it Chavism. It was clear also that he had more than just an economic interest in the Caribbean. My view of him is that he genuinely believed in the solidarity of the people of the region. And after that, we had conversations, a few more conversations. And then, of course, unfortunately, he passed. It was clear, and I continue to believe, that there is a strong basis for the friendship between Jamaica and Venezuela. I'm sure other prime ministers can give far more glowing references of other leaders, including Chavez himself and their relations. Indeed, Venezuela has always sought cooperation with the region. Before Chavez, before Petrocaribe, before Maduro, there was the Caracas Energy Accord in the 2000s. And in the 80s, there was the San Jose Accord with Carlos Andres Perez. In fact, some persons may remember that coming out of the San Andres Accord, the NHT was able to develop Greater Portmore. So the history of cooperation between our two countries is long and deep. And I want to, Mr. Speaker, acknowledge the significant discount that Jamaica benefited from with the buyback of the Petrocarib debt. Mr. Speaker, as a nation, it is always our culture to be grateful for consideration shown. Jamaica is grateful to the people of Venezuela. We wish for them peace, political stability, and economic prosperity. As friends of the people of Venezuela, we cannot turn our backs or close our eyes to the conditions that affect the people of that country. Nor can we ignore the potential for instability in the region. Jamaica has long maintained a principled foreign policy which promotes human rights, the rule of law, and democracy. Even as we also support the principle of non-interference in the affairs of other countries. But can we honestly, as a country, say that the principles that we stand for and what we would wish for all peoples of the world, that these principles are universally benefiting the people of Venezuela? Can we honestly say that? We believe that it is the interest of the people of Venezuela that an objective starting point to resolution and settling of the conflict and returning to stability is for both parties to agree quickly to new elections which meet internationally accepted democratic principles. We note the effort being made through different mechanisms, whether the United Nations, the Montevideo mechanism promoted by CARICOM, the International Contact Group being promoted by the EU, and other individual countries who wish to see Venezuela as we wish to see them, at peace and stable. Mr. Speaker, this is our wish for our friends, and as our friends, we have to speak it as we see it. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, last year I included in my budget presentation a section called Small Actions, Big Impact. And I want to run through a few of them that the government is doing that will have a major impact on the lives of Jamaicans. First one, Mr. Speaker, is the Jamaica House Fellowship Program, which was launched shortly after our administration in 2016. We welcomed the first cohort in 2017, and after 2 years of service, members of the first cohort are saying goodbye. The participants have benefited tremendously, growing personally and professionally, while significantly impacting and making contributions to national policies and programs that are of great importance. Some of the members, some of the fellows serve on the Economic Growth Council. Some of them help to monitor the IMF program. Some of them worked with the National Identification System. Some of them worked in the HOPE program. I believe some worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and others directly in the Office of the Prime Minister. The idea behind the program is to expose bright young talent to public administration in the hope that they will make public service their first choice. I'm sure we will be getting a few permanent secretaries, director generals, and chief technical officers from this program. some have already found positions. The second cohort is expected to have an even richer experience as we learn from the first iteration and make improvements to the program. Mr. Speaker, we will begin accepting applications for the second cohort on Tuesday, March 26, 2019, for qualified candidates to serve as full-time paid Jamaica House Fellows at the Office of the Prime Minister. Small program, but it will have a massive impact in the long run on the governance of the country. Mr. Speaker, a while back I met a lady who brought to my attention the condition of her sister who suffered from lupus. She explained to me the suffering that those afflicted endured, especially if they could not afford the medicine. She wasn't the only one. At one of my town hall meetings, a young lady told the story of her challenges in affording the medication for lupus, which was essential to her survival. Another young lady revealed on social media how she graduated the Norman Mandel Law School at 23 years old. She was one of the first in her family to get tertiary education, but she is now battling with lupus. She revealed that it costs between $50,000 and $60,000 per month, depending on which medication is prescribed for treatment. Of course, not everyone can afford this. Lupus, for the listening public, is an autoimmune disease in which the body's immune system attacks the organs of the body. It is estimated that approximately 6,000 Jamaicans have the condition, the vast majority of which are females. Mr. Speaker, the National Health Fund, an agency of the Ministry of Health, is now celebrating 15 years of service to the people of Jamaica. Over this period, the fund has provided approximately $30 billion in subsidies for pharmaceuticals to NHF cardholders living with 16 chronic illnesses. I'm happy to announce that, having consulted with the Minister of Health, and I just want to be clear, Mr. Speaker, we don't take these decisions in an arbitrary fashion. We consulted, we examined the budget to see if it is possible to make sure that taking these decisions are not just political giveaways for political benefit and affect the Treasury, but we took a decision that is economically sustainable and in the interest of the people of Jamaica. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to announce that the NHF will be adding lupus to the list of conditions covered by the NHF card. And this will take effect on the 30th of April 2019. The annual cost of the coverage is estimated to be 340 million Jamaican dollars. Mr. Speaker, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. You will, Mr. Speaker, you will know.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, I've always maintained that we are in a race for the prosperity of the people. Every good leg that is run puts us closer to the mark. And I commend when there are good runs made. And the NHF is one. It's a good run. Mr. Speaker, every year at Christmas, for the past 5 or 6 years, I make it a point of duty to visit hospitals, places of safety, and golden age homes. Last year, I visited Monsignor Gregory Ramkisoon and the mustard seed communities on the border of my constituency. The year before, I visited Father Richard Holong and his missionaries of the poor. And somewhere in about 2013, I visited the St. John's Bosco boys' home in Mandeville with Sister Susan Fraser of the Sisters of Mercy. Next year, or later this year, I'll visit another such institution. The service that organizations like these give to the poor and the vulnerable is indispensable. I mean, when I go there, I mean, I do it so that I remain grounded. I remain close to the, I don't want to say suffering, because I mean they're in a disabled state, but you know, when you are in the position of a leader, sometimes you are way above the problems and you are seeing the forest and not necessarily the trees, the individual problems. So it's very important, and I do it as a routine, so that I'm reminded of why it is I'm Prime Minister of Jamaica and what is my role. But the service they give, as I've said, is indispensable. Not only do they give care for the disabled and abandoned, but they carry on an incredible social enterprise program where they engage in sustainable business that generates revenue. But what I'm particularly happy about is that it employs the wards and the people who they are caring for. As I saw at Mustard Seed, where some young men were making pottery, and those trinkets were sold in their souvenir shops, or at St. John's Bosco, where they do a thriving meat business. Yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, having learned from the experience, I've asked through the Minister of Finance for him again to check the budget to see if it can be afforded. Because I am not going to breach the principle of fiscal responsibility for a political benefit. For me, the ultimate political benefit is to maintain fiscal discipline. Ultimately, that is the political benefit. Maintain fiscal discipline. So any decision that is made must go through this process of analysis. And the Minister of Finance came back to me and advised that we can allocate $200 million to this year, to the Ministry of Labour and Social Security to support social enterprises in these kinds of organizations. It will be a competitive process. They will have to apply. The programs will have to make economic sense. I'm going to ask the DBJ to assist and help to vet the process. This is not giveaway money to be wasted. This is money to help to strengthen the social enterprises of these agencies. And I believe that that is a good give back to the people. One condition is that these social enterprises must employ the wards, the disabled, the vulnerable, who are in their care, because work is therapeutic, physically therapeutic and mentally therapeutic. It gives them a sense of value. And so we want social enterprise to generate employment for the disabled, the infirm, and for those who are vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, last year I announced a solar lamp project to stimulate the use of solar lamps to replace open flame source lighting in households without electricity. This was primarily in response to 4 children that perished in a tragic blaze in my constituency. 5,000 solar lamps were distributed in 7 constituencies across the corporate area. This was a test case. The PCJ will shortly begin a survey of the beneficiaries to better understand the acceptance and usage of solar alternatives to candles and lamps. Remember, it was not deliberate, but your request is appropriate. The color should be neutral, because that could influence, as ridiculous as it sounds, it could affect the acceptance. I agree, and I'll pass that on. So the PCJ this year the PCJ this year will do another, I believe, another 5,000 at, I believe, an estimate of about 48,000 US dollars. But this time we're going to be focused in St. Catherine and Clarendon. Eventually we'll do the entire island, but we have to study it properly to make sure that it is being accepted, understand what the issues are with its acceptance, and then develop a program for the full acceptance. Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, I believe it was February 1st, a two-year-old twin girls perished in a fire in Grand Spen in the constituency of the Minister of Justice. I'm not certain what the cause of the fire was. I haven't seen the fire report. Not certain if it is because of an open source light or somebody was playing with matches. But 2 of our young souls perished. I want to take this opportunity once again to implore our parents, you must protect your children. Last year, there were 1,526 structural fires in which 30 adults and 9 children perished. I don't want to be reading this statistic again next year. Mr. Speaker, the Development Bank of Jamaica is supporting the government's focus on creating viable investment opportunities for local capital through privatization, supporting business development, and promoting innovation. The government is standing by our commitment to promote broad-based ownership by divesting assets through the stock exchange for the average Jamaican to own. Wigton Wind Farm is the first in a series of government-owned assets that will be placed on the stock market. It is not trickle-down economics, Mr. Speaker. This is creating wealth at the base of the society. A key precursor to the Wigton listing is that the DBJ has successfully refinanced its Petrocarib debt of US $49 million through a bond issue to local investment houses. This bond issue was oversubscribed. The $49 million reflow to the government and the substantial interest in the bond issue are tangible evidence of the critical role and multiple impacts of privatization in the economy. In that regard, DBJ has commenced the assessment of the sale of the government's shares in JPS. Other assets are being considered by the government for listing on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, including the Jamaica Mortgage Bank. I would. Stock Exchange, yes. Both the JPS most of the divestments that will be done in this democratic fashion. We see the stock exchange as a means of democratizing wealth. Yes, there will be. In both in the JPS shares and in Wigton, there is a structure that ensures broad-based participation. However, Mr. Speaker, the project from the DBJ that I would like to highlight today is the boosting innovation, growth, and entrepreneurship ecosystem. Biggie, yes. It's boosting innovation, growth, entrepreneurship ecosystem. This project is designed to This project is designed to finance and otherwise aid innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic growth of small and micro startup businesses in Jamaica. The total to be invested in the program is US $25 million over the next 5 years. The IDB will also The program will also be supported by a US $500,000 grant from the IDB. The objectives of the program is to promote innovation and productivity among established MSMEs with high growth potential, to promote sustainable and disruptive growth in scalable startups, and create sustainable startups and strong supporting ecosystems for entrepreneurship. Most of the support will be in the form of grant. And if it is not going to be a grant, the intention is to set up a venture capital fund. So the support, if it's not grant, it will be equity. Mr. Speaker, these are the kinds of intervention. It's not big, but it is going to support the development of businesses at the very base of the economy, at the roots of the economy. Mr. Speaker, we have put in place a new social housing program. The Minister without portfolio in that ministry has already given some indication of what the program is. Briefly, the program will provide each constituency an allotment for housing to target indigent households. And we are going to be looking specifically now at people who have physical disabilities and the very poor. And we're going to be looking at housing solutions to replace what we call in Jamaica tenement yard, big yards. In my constituency, I recall doing a survey of persons living in a yard, and I have gone up to 100 people living in a yard. And I'm sure others could tell of greater numbers. But we have to address that situation. We cannot allow our children to be growing up in that kind of situation. So, Mr. Speaker, the Minister without portfolio will give the details, but this program starts off with $533 million, which will be spread right across constituencies to support this kind of development. But that number will increase. And the reason why we have started at that amount is to
order, please.
Mr. Speaker, this program is designed to provide 2 bedrooms, 1 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms housing solutions, concrete solutions to the most vulnerable with appropriate amenities to ensure that people can have a safe environment to live in. Can you imagine, Mr. Speaker, God forbid a hurricane were to pass through? Some of these houses would be wiped out. So you need to have at least one safe structure in these big yards. So, Mr. Speaker, we are not going to be able to solve the problem overnight. But one thing is certain, we are going to start and we're going to make a valiant attempt. Mr. Speaker, I announced 2 years ago Plan Secure Jamaica. And I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I'm going to reserve this because this needs an entire presentation in and of itself. But you will know, Mr. Speaker, that we have increased the capital budget in the next fiscal year by $7.5 billion. That is the highest ever increase, and that indicates to you the seriousness with which we take the security of the people of Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, I will just highlight two things in this. This expenditure will help Jamaica to establish control of its borders. The concept of sovereignty, Mr. Speaker. In today's world, a wall is one option to control the border. So, Mr. Speaker, the idea of sovereignty is that you are able to control who comes in and out of your state. What this will do, part of this, it will give us control, knowledge, and domain awareness of our maritime border, which is 25 times the size of our landmass. It will give us control of our shoreline border. It will give us control of our cyberspace. And it will give us capabilities to address the internal threats to the peace and safety of the Jamaican people. I'm not going to say too much about what we have. But what we have done is to restructure the Jamaica Defense Force. There is now in the JDF a Maritime, Air, and Cyber Command. We have expanded the Jamaica Regiment to include two new infantry battalions. We have expanded the Jamaica National Reserve to 2 additional infantry battalion and a national support battalion. We have created the Caribbean Military Academy and the creation of the National Service Corps. So all in all, Mr. Speaker, we are expanding the capacity of the Jamaica Defense Force to deal with the new threats that are emerging to our peace and security. When we think of the safety of Jamaica from a military perspective, we are thinking of an external threat that will require an army. But the unconventional threats are what we need to pay attention to. It is not an invasion from a foreign force, but it is, for example, the growing delinquency amongst our youth because they are unattached and unengaged. The military is a powerful tool of attachment and engagement for the transmission of values to create social order. And so, Mr. Speaker, that has always been a project that I've wanted to implement, and I gave directions to the JDF, and they have executed it seamlessly, efficiently, as they always do, and I'm very happy that the Jamaica Gleaner has recognized the effort and has given them a significant award, a major award, for the work that they have been doing. Mr. Speaker, the National Service Corps is so anticipated that I gather that yesterday there was a fake social media posting that resulted in almost 2,000 youngsters descending. Is you do it, Peter? Okay. But it shows you that our youngsters, they are just waiting for something to say, I can be attached to this. I haven't checked it yet because I was busy writing my speech, but what I saw is that the army decided to interview them nonetheless, though they didn't send out, and I thought that was a good thing. Because, Mr. Speaker, if it were fiscally possible, if it were fiscally possible, I would make the allocation to the Jamaica National Service Corps through the Jamaica Defence Force to take in 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 more youngsters who I know are out there waiting for an opportunity. But it's not fiscally possible right now. But we are doing what we can. Doing what we can. Mr. Speaker, this investment will give us the capacity under the rubric of Plan Secure Jamaica to deal with 3 other threats to our defense of our society. The first threat is guns. The second threat is gangs. And the third threat is the Don. Those are the 3 threats. The guns, the gangs, the Dons. Youth disengagement and unattachment, that's another threat. Cyber is emerging as another threat. Banks don't talk about it. But those are things that we need to get the capacity to address. Now, all of this, let me be clear to this Parliament. This is not a capacity that can be arbitrarily used. There must be systems, rules, procedures, accountability in how the capacity we acquire is used. Jamaica is not a banana republic. Yes, and which is, so there has to be a legislative framework. And you know that we have spoken about how all of this will be done, and we will do this in a very transparent and cooperative manner, because what we wouldn't want is for Jamaica's name to be tarnished by virtue of any misuse of capabilities. Mr. Speaker, we will shortly come to the Parliament with a new piece of legislation to create an intermediary extraordinary power to assist us, the police and the military, to be able to deal with the threats posed by gangs and guns. We were not able to get the support for declaring a state of public emergency in areas that deserve it, but we are not deterred. We see that there is a spike in murders, and we are concerned, but I want to assure the people that your government is doing everything in its power to bring that situation under control. We will bring the legislation here in short order, and we are expecting the support of the opposition in passing the legislation. Mr. Speaker, we have tabled today the legislation for the merger of the Heart Trust with the National Youth Service and the Jamaica Foundation for Lifelong Learning. No, what it does is create a stronger institution. Now you have one focused body dealing with training, youth attachment, and remediation. Because all of them, well, this has been working. I mean, this has been working very well.
Good move.
Mr. Speaker,
why move on? So I can work elsewhere.
At another point, I will give a more detailed report on the Heart Trust. But now, Mr. Speaker, I want to focus on the National Water Commission. Mr. Speaker, another major challenge for the government this year is a disruption to regular water supply caused by a multiplicity of factors: road improvements, repairs under the non-revenue water program, and traffic accidents. Nevertheless, this year, the government is increasing its effort to ensure more Jamaicans have access to an economical and reliable supply of potable water. Over the last 2 years, the NWC has expended almost $9 billion on water supply and sewage projects across the island from its own budget. This does not include the major spend on its intensified collaborative work with the National Works Agency in replacing and upgrading pipelines along corridors in Kingston and St. Andrew, Clarendon, St. Elizabeth, Westmoreland, under the Major Infrastructure Development Program. Currently, under those collaborative arrangements, the NWC and the NWA have worked simultaneously on 14 projects. This saw the installation of 110 kilometers of water mains, which either replaced or upgraded existing ones. The collaboration between the agencies have brought about efficiency in expenditure estimated at between 10 and 15%. Mr. Speaker, an aggressive program to reduce non-revenue water levels in Kingston and St. Andrew is now in its 4th year, and it has been yielding success. By the end of January 2019, non-revenue water levels in Kingston and St. Andrew was reduced from just over 60% of production in mid-2017 to 48%. This level of reduction is a significant achievement and augurs well for improvements in water supply efficiency in Kingston and St. Andrew and the financial performance of the company. The intention is to further reduce non-revenue water to at most 30% by the end of the 3rd quarter of 2019-2020. In addition to reducing non-revenue water, the program is also strengthening NWC's institutional capacity to sustain the reduction and to put the company into a better position to operate its water supply network. Similar programs will be rolled out for Greater Spanish Town, Southeast St. Catherine, Portmore, and some northern parishes. Mr. Speaker, no private company could continue to operate if it could not collect, if it couldn't collect 48% of its total revenue. I don't know which company could continue to survive if it lost 48% of its revenue. Before, we were losing 60% of our revenue, the NWC. No, I'm making a point that having these losses, and these losses have been around for a very long time, this is a demonstration of how inefficiently run public bodies can cost the government. The member from St. Catherine is correct. Action is being taken, and it is good that we are taking action and we are seeing results. The non-revenue water project is not only increasing the revenue collection for the NWC, but it is reducing NWC's energy costs. Mr. Speaker, the public may not know, but the NWC is the largest consumer of electricity in Jamaica. Why? Because the water that we produce, that we are wasting energy to produce, the consumers are not consuming it. It means that the price of water, Mr. Speaker, could be much lower than it is now. Mr. Speaker, the NWC has had major disruptions in water supply to the corporate area for the last 3 months due to a break in its 18-inch transmission line from Ferry, a break in its 33-inch transmission tunnel line, multiple breaks on the main at the Constant Spring facility, breaks on the Hagley Park Road main, and the collapse of the Golden Bridge in Mount Airy, West Rural St. Andrew, which happened recently, though I gather that that is corrected temporarily now. Mr. Speaker, the NWC has responded. The NWC reports that they have trucked over 700,000 gallons of water per week. And I can testify to that. I ensure that trucks go to my constituency and then to the leader of the opposition's constituency. Parson. Well, it's our two constituencies are the most affected, along with parts of Western. Then, Mr. Speaker, we have spent $15 million on water tanks. And again, we have distributed, myself, the leader of the opposition, Western St. Andrew. No, you don't have a water problem. For people who have water problem. So, Mr. Speaker, we have taken action to support persons, constituencies, basic schools and churches and so forth, organizations that have been affected. Mr. Speaker, I am told that the situation will be rectified by the end of this month, that the contractors replacing the pipes are on schedule, and that there will be an ease in the situation. Mr. Speaker, I want to say something quickly on the form of the NWC. The NWC will have significant capital investments to make in the coming future. It will have to spend almost $60 million on replacing 3 lines in Kingston. It will have to find $660 million to repair lines and sewage lines, water mains and sewage mains in downtown Kingston. To do what it has to do right across the island would require somewhere in the region of about $3 billion. That level of expenditure cannot come from the government alone. We have to put NWC in a position where its balance sheet is favorable to private investment, including investment equity from the stock market. So, Mr. Speaker, we have started to do that because NWC, in its present form, is a fiscal risk to the government. At some point in time, you might have a major disruption in a water main right across the country. And then what we're going to say to NWC, we're not spending the money. But we didn't plan for it. And we couldn't afford it. But what we're going to have to do then? We're going to have to borrow at high rates. And then what that does? Puts us right back where we have sacrificed so hard, leader of the opposition. You came here in your presentation and pointed out how much you did. And, I'm not one to be mean-spirited. And I tell you why. When you came back from the IMF, you made a statement. And the statement was, it was sobering. You remember that statement? I went to the IMF before you. And I made this similar statement. Because, not that, we'll come into that. But when we went, there are some arguments that should not be reduced to petty politics. If you're not understanding the argument, listen and learn. Mr. Speaker, I went to the IMF. No, Minister Clark was there, so you can bear witness. 2011. And I sat with then the new director was Lagarde, Christine Lagarde. And I asked, so you have given Greece, I didn't use the term favorable, but you have given consideration to Greece. What about Jamaica? I won't tell you what the answer was. And I suspect you got the same answer. So I am not in any way trying to diminish the role you play. When I came back, I was clear in my mind what had to be done. It was not about politics, it was not about scoring points, it was about rescuing Jamaica that was on the brink of a precipice. Mr. Speaker, when I went to Mandeville, I was seized of what the issue was when I made that statement. I lived, Mr. Speaker, to hear the former Minister of Finance, when he was Minister of Finance, talk the same thing, that there has to be bitter medicine. Because, you know, look, when the politics is in the air, everything can be a smoke screen and people don't understand all the issues. But the truth is that we had no choice, and that is why I take the position that I take, that any expenditure, and on this side and on that side, ministers of finance will know that your ministers will always want to do this, to do that, without considering the fiscal impact. We are only able to do what we have done in this budget. Minister Clark can only stand up here and say, we give back this and we give back that. Because for yes, because of the eucalyptus oil. Because, and you know the funny thing is, I prescribe it, but Peter administers it. Joint sacrifice. When I paid a price because the public wasn't at that time prepared to understand what I was saying. What the public understood was IMF deal in 2 weeks. GCT off electricity. That is what the public was made to believe. But when I became the leader of the opposition, and it's a point to be noted, I didn't, you know, a man came to me, and he's probably listening, and he will probably know himself. He came to me and he said, boy, Andrew, there is just so much gasoline out there, why you don't light the fire? Why you don't light the fire? That time, this government was going through all kinds of, your government was going through. I'm not into the politics of destruction. I'm into constructive politics. So, you know, my record as leader of the opposition will show that I opposed constructively. I didn't engage in opposing for opposing's sake. But alas, we are. But it really happened to me. It really happened. But, Mr. Speaker, we are here today because we have maintained fiscal discipline. That is why we are here today. We are tempted to do all kinds of things, but we say no. Let us maintain fiscal discipline. So, Mr. Speaker, rural water supply improvement. Mr. Speaker, the government is not only focused on water for the urban areas. We are also spending some serious money on rural water supply systems. The opposition, Mr. Speaker, has criticized this budget, which gives back to the people, as a trickle-down budget, meaning that the give back is to a certain class of elite people in the hopes that their investment and consumption will fall in drops to the mass. Mr. Speaker, as someone who I respect dearly would have said when he stood in this position, mash down that lie. Mash down that lie. There's no trickle-down economics being practiced by this government. This government believes in equity and taking affirmative, progressive, and instrumental action to uplift the poor. We are not socialists who just talk. We are pragmatic social activists committed to taking sustainable action to benefit the poor. That is why we make high school education tuition fee free. That is why we introduce free access to health care in the time of need. That is why we are building more houses for Jamaicans than ever before. And that is why we are giving back to small and micro business like never before. That is why more people are getting jobs than any time in the history of Jamaica. That is what we are doing, Mr. Speaker. Building a new Jamaica through action. So we're not into this trickle-down foolishness. Under this government, blessings fall by the right hand. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this government has allocated $795 million for the upcoming year for rural water. That's the highest allocation. This is 7 times higher than what the previous allocation was. Almost 800 million. And I tell you what, depending on how our revenue targets look, we could very well consider an addition to rural water, because they deserve it. Whenever I go around the country and I see what people have to go through, they deserve. So, Mr. Speaker, 61,000 persons in rural communities will now see prosperity, not trickling down on them, but showers of water through rural water. No trickle down around here. Blackfield Phase 1 and 2, Loading Bay, Islington, Mile Gully, Carron Hall, all in the parish of St. Mary. Their water projects will be addressed in this $790 million. Golden Hill and Dublin Castle in St. Andrew. Islington, Charlestown, and Kildare in Portland. Penn, Hamwalk, Riversdale, Sligoville in St. Catherine. Gravesend in Trelawney. Matney, Spring. Brandon Hill, Johnny's Hill, Redlands, that is Clarendon. Hold on. Perth Spring and Tiki in Manchester. Aberdeen and adjoining areas, Burnt Brown and Millquarters in St. Elizabeth. Trophy Hole Spring and Rejoin in Hanover. Maroon Town and Tangle River in St. James. Queenite, Tickets and Keith in St. Anne. We'll be doing catchment tank rehabilitation island-wide. Oh, we don't put anything there for Westmoreland? I'll come to you with Westmoreland. I'll come to you with that. Another project that will benefit from this is, it's an excellent project. It's the rainwater harvesting for schools in rural areas. So they have completed, that is the Rural Water Supply Limited, Charlton Primary, and Fort George Primary Schools in St. Anne, Nakalva Agriculture in Hanover, Carlogie Primary in Manchester, Rock Primary, Ashley Primary, and Mount Airy Primary in Clarendon, and Waitabit Primary and Low River Primary in Trelawney. So, Mr. Speaker, this budget is not just giving back to a certain class of people. This budget is providing something for everyone in Jamaica. I want to quickly run through the NAA because I know the NAA and the roadworks are consuming the minds of many Jamaicans. Over the last 4 budgets, I've used the opportunity to give an update on infrastructure works. Indeed, improving our road infrastructure is critical to productivity, connectivity, and building a prosperous Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, if you left the island 2 years ago and you plan to return summer coming, you may not recognize some parts of Jamaica. Transformation is happening before your very eyes. And I want to thank the people of Jamaica for their patience as we move to complete several major road corridors, and we are going to start others. This will be the year of unveiling, or rather, the year we roll out the carpet. No, your project is coming. Your project is coming. Your project is coming. Mr. Speaker, the major infrastructure development project, which is being supervised by the National Work Agency under the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, is almost at an end. The government of Jamaica and China Harbour Engineering Company entered into a contract of execution of works, including road rehabilitation, the construction of critical retaining walls, island-wide patching of roads, bridge construction, and river training. Overall, all right, Mr. Speaker, I look at this request. For rural water. And a point of order.
Order, please do not disturb the Prime Minister when he talks about water for Rock River.
Overall, the mid-P, and it's critical that we note these points, the mid-P is 91% complete based on financial spend. Approximately US $320.7 million of 352.941 million US has been programmed and certified. Component 1 is 80% complete, component 2 is 90% complete, and component 3 is 93% complete. Mr. Speaker, NWC ancillary works, which includes installation of water pipelines and sewage, are 81% complete. Contractually, the Hagley Park Road, Constant Spring Road, and Ferris to Macfield Road improvement projects are to be substantially completed by the end of June 2019. The National Works Agency continues to pursue an aggressive construction schedule with the intention to fast-track these projects. I want to give an update on bridges. Mr. Speaker, in 2017, I went to St. Mary, and I made a commitment to the people of Southeast St. Mary for the Chesterfield Bridge. People didn't have a bridge. The people were the people were walking across a river to get to their community. And you know, Mr. Speaker, it's a lovely community. Lovely community. And the people appealed. They appealed. And I came back. I spoke with the NWA. I said, what is in your budget? And how can this be programmed? And we figured out a way that we could program the expenditure. We didn't do it right away. We planned it out till it was possible. And this is why it has taken this long. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to report that the Chesterfield Bridge is almost complete and will be available for use by residents of Southeast St. Mary in a short order. Promise made, promise kept. But the government, Mr. Speaker, is spending or has spent $500 million on major bridge repairs. There is the Dyke Road box culvert in St. Catherine. That was for $59 million, 98% complete. We have done Barracks River Bridge in St. Mary. That is in progress. That is $40 million. I believe we have completed the Bull Bay Greenvale Bridge Phase 1, and we are in progress with Bull Bay Greenvale Bridge, or Version Gully Phase 2. We did Cod Pen multi-cell box culvert, that is in St. Thomas, and that is in progress for $35 million. We did Ward River Bridge in St. Thomas, and that is 95% complete. By now should be almost done. And East Palm Bridge in Portland, that is in progress for $23 million. We did Gordon Town box culvert in St. Andrew. That was $26 million. That is in progress. And Mahogany Vale Bridge in St. Thomas, that's in progress. That's $140 million. And we did Tranquility Bridge in Portland, that's completed for $34 million. So we have been doing some serious spending on bridges right across the country. Mr. Speaker, I want to say something on the Montego Bay bypass. Mr. Speaker, the western end of the island will see road infrastructure development through the Montego Bay Perimeter Road project. This project will significantly reduce travel time along the well-traversed corridor of Howard Cook Boulevard through Temple Gallery to Iron Shore in St. James. The 14.9 kilometer bypass is currently in the design phase and is expected to be 4 lanes with the usual safety barriers. In addition to the bypass itself, the following roadwork will be carried out in order to further improve the traffic flow within Montego Bay. We're going to improve Barnett Street and West Green Avenue. This 1.7 kilometer roadway will be upgraded from 2 to 4 lanes to more effectively handle the traffic coming into and out of Montego Bay. We'll be doing the Long Hill bypass. This 10.5 kilometer 2-lane road will bypass the treacherous section of the existing Long Hill Road and connect the Montego Bay Perimeter Road to Montpelier. It will also improve access from Montego Bay to the south coast of the island and complement the works already being undertaken at Ferris Cross to Macfield. Work has already started, and people only believe work has started when they see the backhoe breaking the ground. But these things take time to design and plan and test and all kinds of, and that work is going on. The contractor who has the design works should be finished in this year, in the fiscal year coming rather, 2019-2020, and actual work should start immediately thereafter. South Coast Road Improvement Project. Mr. Speaker, the South Coast Highway Improvement Project is part of the government strategic plan for unlocking the growth prospects on the South Coast by connecting Negril, Westmoreland to Port Antonio, Portland via the medium of a highway system. The construction of this highway network will enable easier travel around the island, enable sustainable utilization of existing natural resources, and provide for future development of the country. Mr. Speaker, the South Coast Highway Improvement Project entails the following: construction of 16-kilometer 4-lane highway with safety barriers from Harborview to Yallas to be undertaken by CHEC, that's China Harbor Engineering Company, for US $110 million. The rehabilitation of 96 kilometers of roadway from Yallas Bridge to St. Thomas, Yallas Bridge in St. Thomas to Port Antonio in eastern Portland. This work, Mr. Speaker, will even out the bends in the roadway that is there. It will follow the existing alignment, but work will be done to reduce the deep corners and to ensure that the road is actually resilient to any climate change events. The South Coast. So we're doing one leg of the South Coast is 96 kilometers, and that goes from Yallas Bridge in St. Thomas to Port Antonio in eastern Portland. This work will be supervised by the NWA under contract to the main contractor CHEC. But this will be done by local contractors. All of this work will be done by local contractors. I want to emphasize that. Built into the contract is that local contractors will do this length. Then there will be rehabilitation of 26 kilometers of roads. Coming to that. Rehabilitation of 26 kilometers of road from Morant Bay to Cedar Valley along the existing road alignment, and that will be to reduce corners, improve safety, and open access to lands that are there that might be of touristic value, housing value, and agricultural value. This will be taken again by local contractors under subcontract to CHEC. The value of this work is $11.4 million. And then there is the extension of the east-west toll road from Maypen to Williamsfield, just outside of Mandeville. The value is US $188.5 million. Design work, the various constituencies that are affected should note this. Design work, land acquisition, and interagency cooperation between the NWA and the NWC is far advanced. Tendering for the local component of the construction work, which is broken up into several packages, is slated to begin shortly. And shortly mean after the by-election, so that there is no letter coming to me about works influencing outcomes. So as soon as that issue has passed, then they will be going out to tender. The construction activities will include pavement, retaining wall, earthworks, drainage, all kinds of things will be done there. 5 packages will be put out initially. Surge Island to Cedar Valley, that's 11.7 kilometers. Morant Bay to Surge Island, 14.7 kilometers. Manchaneed to Fair Prospect, 8.8 kilometers. Hordley to Long Pond, 4.16 kilometers. And Morant Bay to Prospect. So, Mr. Speaker, we expect that this work will last 3 years, and when it is finished, we would have opened up the eastern end of the island. The government of Jamaica is considering, well, not considering, we are far advanced in developing what is called a greater infrastructure development program. Yes, the GIDP, the Greater Infrastructure Development Program. We will be seeking competitive resources to finance it. And, Mr. Speaker, the projects that are selected for this, what I call third phase of the then JD, then mid-P, this third phase of this major infrastructure development. These projects are going to be selected based on technical recommendations and our economic plan, but most importantly, climate smart considerations. And so drainage, the master drainage plan, the master drainage plan will be, included. By the way, all that I've said in terms of the pricing so far has been in US dollars, so in case anybody misinterpreted US dollars. All right, so Mr. Speaker, we're going to be looking in this greater infrastructure development program at the proposal for a ring road around the Kingston metropolitan area. Yes. We're going to look at the extension of the Mandela Highway improvement works from the east-west toll road to the Old Harbour roundabout. We're going to be looking at improving Halfway Tree. Yes. Oh, yes. And doing some major works in Halfway Tree. We're going to be doing the construction of several bypasses. And bypasses are important because it's not just the road, it is also a program of making our small urban towns more functional. Yes. When you drive through them, there's so many things going on. The town is growing, but its very growth is killing the town. So you have to, in addition to doing the bypass of the town, you have to do work inside the town. So it's a dual program. It's bypass and it's rural township development. Yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, these are the areas that we're looking at. We're looking at the Lucy bypass in Hanover. Yes. We're looking at the Hopewell bypass. We're looking at the Anato Bay bypass in St. Mary. We have already spoken about Long Hill and the Anchovy bypass in St. James. We are looking at the Port Maria bypass. We haven't put it here, but we are also looking at the Spur Tree. Then, Mr. Speaker, we're looking at drainage. Marcus Garvey Drive. No, well, Mr. Speaker, in developing the project, there are a series of proposed things that we could do in the greater infrastructure program. What we have done is to select projects, as I said earlier, based on technical advice, the economic program, and by that I mean where are tourism products likely to be required? Where will be the new hotels or new factories? And then we look at our vulnerabilities. So we are going to do it in a climate smart way. We're going to do it according to our master plan for drainage, which was completed a few years ago. And that now has instructed us that we have to do drainage works on Marcus Garvey Drive, Maxfield Avenue in the corporate area, just to name two, Maypen, Santa Cruz, Port Maria, and Montego Bay. So that's how we are putting together the plan. In saying this, other persons might hear this and say, oh, Prime Minister, here is something that you should look at. If it makes sense, we pass it on to the experts. Windward Road is already there. Windward Road Windward Road will be done. It will be done. Right? Mr. Speaker, to be clear, this is not a roadwork project. Let me just explain this part clearly to the nation. This is not like the mid-P. And by the way, we had to modify the mid-P because we recognized that we had to include water, sewage, and potable water. In some instances, we have to consider ICT infrastructure. So now what we are doing is creating a project which will be looking at road development, yes, but water and wastewater, along with the road development, drainage, bridges, transportation, and ICT. And I want to spend a little time on transportation, because included in the greater infrastructure development program will be consideration for light rail to connect Kingston, Spanish Town, Portmore, and other urban areas that have substantial commuter traffic. So all of that is being planned out now for the next phase of infrastructure development in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, I want to offer an apology to those who have been inconvenienced by these works, both the water inconvenience and the traffic and dislocation. As I said earlier, there is room for improvement. However, we are largely on schedule and we are making substantial progress. We ask for your continued support and understanding. We didn't take on all these projects at once for bravado. The truth is, and this needs to be said in the public domain, the government of Jamaica signed 2 contracts, one with China Harbour for a 3-year construction schedule, and one with the Exim Bank of China for a 5-year disbursement schedule. So, Mr. Speaker, if you consider that the construction schedule is 3 years, if you were to take Ferris to Macfield, that's a 14-month project. If you were to take Marcus Garvey, that's a 14-month. If you took the Mandela, 18 months. You take Constant Spring, that's a 14 months. You take Barbican, that's 12. If you were to put them sequentially, you've gone over 3 years already. So the contract signed already conceded that you would have to do these projects simultaneously. So, Mr. Speaker, but leave that aside. If the projects were all dispersed over Jamaica, doing them simultaneously would not be an issue because it's all over. But the projects that were selected in the contract were all concentrated here. Now, the question is, who signed the contract, who selected the project? Who signed the contract? No, but leave that as it is. Don't argue about that point. Hold on. Because, Mr. Speaker, many times, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, many times I have to listen to accusations and you really want to correct it, but sometimes when you say the correction, the public not in a mood to listen. Sometimes you have to go through too much of a convoluted explanation. So once I have this opportunity, I have to take the time to correct all of the false narratives that have been created. Mr. Speaker, I want us to look at the truthful situation here. Now, if the government allowed the disbursement schedule, which is 5 years, with the China Exim Bank to run out, you could face a problem. What is the problem? If the contractor has not completed the work and your disbursement schedule runs out, who becomes liable to pay the contractor? The government. We would be, so if we have a schedule of payments and you don't finish the work in time, Exim Bank can't pay for work that's not done. And so what we create there now? A fiscal risk. That's a problem. Now, look how complicated the problem is. In the first year, the government of Jamaica was supposed to spend, out of the Mid-P project, $55.078 million US dollars. Now, that money is matched by 15% Jamaican money. So the government should make an allocation 15% of $55.07 million US dollars. In the second year, the government of Jamaica is supposed to spend 15% of $165.5 million US dollars. And then in the third year, the government of Jamaica is supposed to spend $132.3 million US dollars, 15% of that. But this is what happened. In 2013-14 budget, the government approved $2.5 billion and revised it down to $422 million. So essentially, in the first year of the construction schedule, nothing was done. What the money was spent on? Jeep. Government made a decision to spend the money on Jeep. In 2014-2015, hold on. Let us look at the truth and problem.
Order, please. Do not disturb the member.
In the 2014-2015 budget, in the 2015-2014 budget, the government was supposed to spend $4 billion. Actually approved $4 billion, but spent $2.1 billion. So essentially, no real work took place. I think at that time they started the what's it called, the Cupious Bridge in Clarendon? That would be in your constituency, Mr. Speaker. Cupious Bridge. Yes. Yeah, but I'm saying you did. But so, Mr. Speaker, yes, I did. So, Mr. Speaker, in 2015-2016, the government just started to spend some money, allocated $3.5 billion. But of course, by then, government had changed. So when we inherited the program, we were already in deficit, both deficit in the sense of behind in terms of expenditure, but also 2 years gone out of the project already. So it is not that the government was callous and careless and just wanted to show how great we are. There were genuine fiscal risks involved because you had 3 years of disbursement left and 1 year of construction left. It was not 1 or 2 or 3 times that the Chinese government had to indicate to me, why are we not spending the money? You don't want it? Minister Shaw can tell you how many times they have come to him about it. And I took a decision that first of all, it would be bad for Jamaica to negotiate a loan, pay the commitment fees, and then have the money sitting there not used. Right? And then what would happen now is that if the works are continuing and the payment disbursement period has ended, the government becomes liable to pay China Harbour. That is a fiscal risk that we couldn't take. So I want the public to understand. I understand the challenges you are going through, but these are decisions that we have to make in the public's interest. You know, Mr. Speaker, I listen carefully. To the criticisms levied at the government about the broken mains and the water pipes. And, you know, I think we could do better. I think we could. And we have learned. I have gone through with the president of the NWC and the CEO of NWA. I know they are working very closely now. A very good interagency relationship has developed, and I think that augurs well for projects going forward. But as we look at the projects that have been done, so yes, there is a break in the water mains. Some of those pipes are 50 years old or more, right? Just a little shift in the earth will break them. So in other words, it's not because of the bridge why the overpass that is being built why it broke. It was going to break anyway. Now, when it's the good management report. When you want to hear the engineer's report, when your government, and I believe you would have been either Minister of Transport and Works, probably Minister of Transport and Works, when Washington Boulevard was being done. I don't think you were the minister, it was Roger. No, the second. You laid some pipes there. NWC laid some pipes there. But you know what? Those pipes were never connected. The intention was, to connect those pipes, to connect those pipes to the pipes coming along Mandela, Rear Cobre, and then connect them into Constant Spring. Now that interconnectivity would, if Toller Springs went down, then you could divert water from Constant Spring, or vice versa. No, you couldn't do that. The pipe go down, and we don't have that interconnection. No, we are going to have to do it. Luckily, there are technologies available now where we can tunnel under the road without digging up the whole road to do it, and they are exploring that now. So yes, we are going to rehabilitate those pipes, and we're going to use them. So when we are leveling criticism about government callous and cavalier, no, don't do it. Don't do it, because I don't take my responsibility lightly. I don't make these decisions light. I try to look at all the possibilities, because a feature of good governance is risk management. Yes. You have to analyze your risks. So again, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I know everybody wants to hear about NHT, because some lovely things are happening there, and I'm going to go through it as quickly as possible. Mr. Speaker, during fiscal year 2018-2019, the National Housing Trust increased construction activities and is currently on target to achieve 5,800 housing starts and 2,800 housing completions by the 31st of March 2019. The NHT has increased its activities in the construction segment of its business in recent years. Planned housing expenditure for 2019-2020 is $39.4 billion. This is more than twice the sum expended in 2016. That's how much we have increased our expenditure. The resulting impact is more than 14,000 housing starts for the period 2016 to 2019, thereby increasing inventory by over 150%. These activities by the Housing Trust have resulted in cash and investments declining by 22%. And there is a noted shift from investing in the financial market to investing in housing and in the lives of the persons that the entity was set up by Michael Mann to serve. You see, there was an error in governance thinking that having a massive reserve is good. That's not, with good fiscal management, you don't need to have the reserve. You need to plan your revenues and expenditure and use the money to do what it is supposed to do. Mr. Speaker, I grew up in an NHT scheme house in a community in Ensom City called Riverside Park. And ever so often when I get to go back and I visit the scheme, I'm concerned because the scheme has not kept up as how I remembered it and as how I would have liked it to be kept up. And this is the case for many housing schemes. I know that the NHT has a very robust best scheme competition which has gotten the engagement of persons who have purchased homes in schemes, and that has helped to keep the schemes up. But there are many schemes that are deteriorating. And so, Mr. Speaker, in 2016, I asked the NHT to structure a housing scheme upgrade program for selected NHT schemes built between 1976 and 1986. This initiative began in 2017 and was extended to include housing schemes built by the Ministry of Housing prior to 1986. And we're developing now, well, we have started to do this program, and I want to just list some of the projects. In St. Elizabeth, we're doing Lower Works and Jerusalem, $28 and $23 million. In Westmoreland, Culloden, $60 million, and Bethel Town, $50 million. That is in terms of spending to repair the scheme, in terms of infrastructure, roads, and even some river training where the scheme is near a river. In St. James, we're doing Farm Heights and Pitford. In St. Anne, the civil housing scheme. In St. Mary, Barreef Hall and Gale. In Portland, Woodstock, a lovely community, and Anchovy. And in Kingston and St. Andrew, they're doing Avalon Court Phase 2, Grant Spen, and Corville Gardens apartments. They're doing Duhaney Park, Hemingway, and Sherlock Crescent as well. And they're doing Duhaney Park, Brook Valley Housing Scheme. In total, that is $813 million being spent by the NHT to do these upgrading programs. In the upcoming fiscal year, they will be doing Orange River in St. Mary. They will be doing Bushy Park in Clarendon, Ashley Hall. In Manchester, they will be doing Cedar Grove, Chudley. In Kingston and St. Andrew, Mountain View, Delacree Park Housing Scheme. They will be doing Brownstone and Victoria Avenue, Grant Spen. In St. Anne, Monique Housing Scheme, Edgecombe. In St. Elizabeth, Lower Works and Jerusalem. In Westmoreland, Orchard. In St. Elizabeth, Esher Housing Scheme, Trelawney, Hague, and Vanzeland. In St. Thomas, Yallas Housing Scheme, Red Hill Spen. In St. Catherine, Southborough, Riverside Park, thank God. Cumberland, Portsmouth, Newsworks, Cromarty, Hellshire, Westchester, Hamilton Gardens, Ebonyvale, Charlemont, Lime Tree Grove, Church Pen. That's $1.6 billion. Mr. Speaker, on a different program. Mr. Speaker, historically, public sector workers have received special consideration from the NHT, and in 2018-19, this continued. We have extended to 2021 the program for eligible mortgages, and our eligible mortgages who are public sector workers to be able to access their cash refund. Additionally, mortgagors who are public sector workers can now access their NHT second loan sooner the time to access a second loan was reduced from 15 to 10 years in 2018. In addition to the above, the NHT is pursuing the Guaranteed Purchase Program, which was announced in November 2018, under which the NHT purchases units from developers who built or will build solutions in the prescribed areas at the approved price point. The Trust is currently in discussions with 18 developers under this program. The number of solutions to each project under evaluation for purchase ranges from 10 to 750. Mr. Speaker, the NHT recognizes the value of partnership and therefore introduced the Employer-Assisted Housing Program to interested employers in the third quarter of 2018-2019 fiscal year. Under this program, the NHT is seeking to partner with employers who wish to provide resources to the construction of housing to benefit their staff. The NHT to date has approached over 30 employers and professional associations, including a major employer of security guards, one of the largest manufacturing companies in Jamaica, and several churches. Mr. Speaker, still with partnership as a way of achieving its mandate, the Housing Finance Loan Program was established in partnership with the credit unions in August 2017 with the aim of expanding the NHT's reach to low-income distributors by improving their access to funds for housing solutions. The applicable income ceiling was recently increased from 30,000 per week, to 42,000 per week. Currently, 8 credit unions are now signatories to the program. The HMFP has facilitated the creation of 222 loans valued at $135.4 million since the inception of the program. Over 57% of loans dispersed were used for housing deposits, which is consistent with information which suggests that housing deposit remains a significant barrier to home ownership. Security guards, teachers, and ancillary workers account for over 65% of the total loan dispersed. Mr. Speaker, we need to demonstrate the value we place on the service given by our security forces and also the security of our people. And one way of doing so is improving the conditions under which they work. $2 billion is earmarked for a 2-year renovation project with the Ministry of National Security and the Jamaica Constabulary Force for the refurbishment of 100 police stations. Currently, the Mobile Reserve Barracks, Port Antonio, Buff Bay police stations are all being upgraded. Based on discussions with the Ministry of National Security, it was decided that the funds earmarked for the renovation projects could be more effectively utilized in addressing the deficiencies of police stations and a greater impact on the communities with a greater concentration of NHT contributors, with the focus on the larger police station. As a result of these discussions, the following improvement projects will be undertaken. In Portland, the Portland Police Station, $125 million. Buff Bay Police Station, $95 million. In St. Mary, the Port Maria Police Station, $250 million. Westmoreland, the Savannah Police Station, $165 million. Little London Police Station, $60 million. Frome Police Station, $60 million. In St. James, Anchovy Police Station, $60 million. In St. Elizabeth, Lacovia Police Station, $60 million. In St. Andrew, Olympic Gardens Police Station, thank God for that, $114 million. That police station has been long in coming. Mobile Reserve, $89 million. And in St. Catherine, Spanish Town Police Station, $120 million. A total of $1.198 billion being spent by the NHT to repair police stations. Mr. Speaker, we cannot overemphasize the need for protection of the vulnerable. A famous quote from Mahatma Gandhi springs to mind here. The true measure of a society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. The NHT is also partnering with the Ministry of Local Government in an effort to improve the housing conditions of the less fortunate. This will be achieved through the refurbishment of infirmaries across Jamaica. The amount budgeted is $135 million. We have noted that there is a need to improve and increase the overnight capacity for parents who have to stay with their children at the Bustamante Children's Hospital. What is actually happening is that the facility was designed for mothers, but we are seeing that fathers are also more and more spending the time, and so we have to build facilities. So we'll be spending some resources there to expand that. There's so many things the NHT is doing, but let me skip some of those. Get to what people want to hear. In 2019-2020, the NHT will improve affordability and access to its products. Around the time of the NHT's interest rate policy change in November 2015, the Bank of Jamaica estimated that average building society mortgage credit rates were about 9.53%, while the lowest rate among the 5 key institutions was 8.45%. Since then, 4 of the institutions have reduced their rates. Scotia Building Society moved from 12% to 8.9%. Victoria Mutual Building Society moved from 8.5 to 7.75. Jamaica National Building Society remained at 8.5, and National Commercial Bank lowered their rate from 8.45 to 7.45, and Sagicor moved from 8.5 to 7.5%. The average mortgage rate reported by the BOJ at the end of October 2018 was 8.37%. Also in keeping with the downward trajectory of interest rate, the BOJ recently announced an overnight rate of 1.75% versus 5.75% in December 2015. That is as a result of good government. While the change in the NHT's interest rate structure are fairly recent, market developments point to the need to reduce rates even further. Given the predictions of higher output from the NHT on the construction side, it is necessary to also create a platform that ensures greater levels of affordability for persons at the lower end of the contribution pool. Without such assurances, take-up of intended output may be skewed towards the upper end of the target market. That is, adjustments will improve affordability levels for mortgagors generally, but more importantly, for those in the lower bands. Therefore, in keeping with market trends of declining interest rates, the NHT proposes to reduce interest rates by 1% for all mortgagors. Widen the current income band to account for changes in the earning levels since their last adjustment. The ceiling of the lowest interest rate band would be increased from $15,000 per week will be increased to $15,000 per week from the current $12,000 per week, thereby allowing more persons to access the home grant, which is tied to this marker. These adjustments will result in the following changes to the NHT mortgage rate structures. If you're earning previously $12,000 weekly, you would be paying 0%. Under the new system, if you earn $15,000 weekly, you pay 0%. So increasing the rate brings in more people. Previously, if you earn between $12,001 to $20,000 weekly, you would pay 2%. Now, if you earn $15,001 and $30,000, you pay 1%. If you earn between $20,001 and $30,000 under the previous system, you would have been paying 4%. Now, if you are earning between $30,001 and $42,000 weekly, you will be paying 3%. Those who were earning at $30,001 previously would pay 6%. Now they will pay 5% if they are earning $42,001 and above. So not just that we have it's not now that we have just dropped the rate, but we have changed the bands. We have increased the bands. So if your weekly previously, if your weekly income was $50,000 and you had a loan of $5.5 million and you were paying 6%, your mortgage would be something like $38,144. Now, your mortgage rate would be 5% and your actual mortgage payment would be $34,521. You would save monthly $3,623. You can't ask for a better give back, right? If you were earning $32,000 weekly and you had a $5.5 million mortgage, previously you would be paying 6% and you would have a mortgage of $38,144. Now you would be paying 3%. Your actual payment would be $27,868, and you would save $10,270. If your salary was $22,000 and you took a mortgage of $5.5 million, then you would be paying 4% in terms of percentage, and your actual mortgage would be $31,091 at 1%. No, at 4% rather. No, you would be paying at 1%, and your actual payment would be $22,095. You would save $8,966. And if you had if you were earning $14,000 weekly and you took out a loan of $4 million, previously you'd be paying 2%. Your mortgage payment would be $18,572. Now you pay 0%. Right? You'd only pay back $14,704, but you save $3,858. So, Mr. Speaker, you can't ask for a better give back than what we have just done. But there's more. There's more. Mr. Speaker, the NHT, this will cost the NHT $1.2 billion. And some of that will be offset by a policy change, which would see the NHT transferring to income unclaimed contributors' refund that remain with the trust for 10 years after the refund comes due. We're coming to that. We're going to do that. We're going to do something. Don't worry. Mr. Speaker, the NHT seeks to improve access to home ownership Therefore, the trust proposes an increase to its current loan limit from 5.5 million to 6.5 million, an 18% increase over the current figure. This increase is consistent with the estimated changes in construction costs. Please wait until the Prime Minister
complete before you applause, because we are not able to hear the end of it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So please repeat that one, Prime Minister.
The trust will increase its current loan limit from 5.5 million to 6.5 million, an increase of 18% over the current figure. But here is something that I'm particularly pleased with, and we worked on this while we were in opposition. Senator Hill is here, and will remember the nights we spent working on intergenerational mortgages. Mr. Speaker, intergenerational mortgages allow for flexibility in how a family member can support the beneficiary in acquiring an NHT property. In the case of this proposed program, the aim is for a younger sibling or child to agree to carry the mortgage obligation subject to affordability when the older mortgager retires or dies. Under this program, the loan will be scheduled over a 60-year period. The beneficiary's loan with the NHT will be scheduled to retirement and will include the portion of the cost to be covered during the period from the date of the loan to retirement. For example, if the beneficiary has 20 years to retirement, then it would be a 20-60 or a 1/3 ratio of the cost of the solution, which will be factored into the required payment. The beneficiary will be required to present to the NHT, and here, they're here. That here must be a younger sibling or a child who will consent to repaying the outstanding amounts of the cost of the asset, which will be adjusted to current values. That sibling will be allowed to take over the asset if they agree to various terms, including allowing the beneficiary to occupy the premises for an agreed period of time. The beauty of this is that the cycle may be repeated for a second heir to take over the housing solution. Mr. Speaker, the details of this will be made public by the NHT, and interested persons can inquire of the NHT how it will work. For reasons of time, obviously. Mr. Speaker, No, Mr. Speaker, this is being implemented this year. What this will do is that older persons who would not qualify for a mortgage because they are closer to retirement, so the mortgage is usually 25 to 30 years, and they may have 10 years to go. What they can do is take up the loan. They will be responsible for the portion of the loan from the time they take the loan to the point of their retirement. And then the apparent heir will take over the loan at that time. No. And what this is meant to do is this is meant to support capital accumulation in really poor families, right? Because now you can pool your wealth, which is, not always possible. This is a very practical way of ensuring that we give everybody a shot at owning their wealth. Mr. Speaker, we have also changed the construction loan limit, because previously what would happen, the construction loan limit was between $20 and $2.5 million. the data collected from the surveys conducted by the Trust of the Service Lot Program revealed that approximately 65% of the recipients of this product type opined that the amount allowed by the NHT for the construction of a unit on the lot is inadequate. Currently, the mortgagor is granted a construction loan amounting to the difference between the price of the service lot and the NHT loan limit. Typically, this amounts to between $2 million and $2.5 million, forcing the mortgagor to seek financing elsewhere. With more than a half of all NHT lots yet to be built on, the NHT proposes increasing the construction loan limit for NHT service lots in an effort to stimulate activities in this area. The limit is proposed as a difference in the price of the NHT's two-bedroom unit in the scheme where the lot is and the price of the lot. The limit of this loan will remain at 2 times the individual's loan limit, less the mortgage on the lot in the case of co-applicants by 2 NHT contributors. Additionally, to encourage the uptake of this type of loan, the NHT will apply the necessary moratorium to facilitate the ease of paying rent while simultaneously serving their mortgage. However, recipients will be expected to begin building within 3 years of the loan being dispersed. Failure to commence construction will result in the lot reverting to the NHT. So, Mr. Speaker, what will happen now, or previously, the NHT would develop a scheme. Some of the units would be service lots, and some of them would be completed buildings. The NHT would set a limit, which what it does is prevent the person who has purchased the service lot from having enough money to actually start construction. That, we feel, is a factor in why persons who buy these service lots don't start constructing. So now what we have done is to raise the limit, and that limit would be the value of a 2-bedroom housing unit in the scheme where the lot is. And so a person who purchases a service lot now has a greater capacity to actually start construction. Mr. Speaker, I have given a tour de force of all that the government is doing. And I know that many agencies are going to be upset with me because they didn't make it into the speech. But the government is doing a lot. The government has done a lot. And Mr. Speaker, we haven't done it in a way that is not equitably distributed. In this budget that we have presented between the Minister of Finance and myself, I believe there is something in there for every category, every sector, every interest. I say to this country, don't be afraid of prosperity. When we remove transfer tax, basically remove stamp duties, and then we reduce the NHT rates, increase the ceiling, change the bands so that more people can benefit. Now is the time to build house. Now is the time to buy house. Now is the time to make that critical investment in your life. Now is the time to be optimistic about the future. Now is the time to build the new Jamaica which we all desire. Mr. Speaker, the government is taking positive, thoughtful, and decisive actions on all fronts to improve the quality of life for all Jamaicans. We acknowledge and accept that there are challenges, that there is room for improvement. We are not perfect. We make mistakes. But the measure of a good government is how they act to guard the public trust by correcting wrongs immediately and putting in place systems to promote and safeguard the good governance of the people's affairs. The measure of a good government is how they protect and actively empower the weakest and most dispossessed in the society. The measure of a good government is the frugality and care in the management of the people's money and income to protect them from inflation and unnecessary taxes. The measure of a good government is their belief in the private enterprise of the citizen, that if we empower them, if we give them assets, if we give them employment, they will secure their own economic independence. The measure of a good government is that we place security of the people first and do all in our power to protect the lives of the people and the freedom of every citizen. The measure of good government is that they defend the interests of their country above all else. The measure of a good government is that they see to the efficiency of the administration and the dignity of the state. The measure of a good government is the prosperity of the people. Never before has there been a budget like this in the history of Jamaica. I pray God to watch over this government. Use our hands, our hearts, and our minds as instruments for the good of the people of this beautiful country. God bless you all, and God bless Jamaica like you.
Is still in session. I'm going to ask all members of the gallery to have a seat. The House is still in session. Members live in the gallery must live orderly. The House is still in session. Members, Prime Minister, I must apologize. Prime Minister, I must apologize for not advising you that a student from St. Catherine High was here to see you. I wish you to recognize that. Further today, a number of members have complained. The Speaker decided there was no business here today other than public business. And as such, in conjunction with the Leader of Government business, we started the House at 3 o'clock. And those who are complaining from the opposition side, even some were late coming in. Please understand that. Mr. Samuda. Order, please.
Mr. Speaker.
Let's have some order in the House.
Mr. Speaker, it is clear to all present that this was a tremendous presentation by the Prime Minister of Jamaica. He brought clarity and a better sense of understanding of what we are about going forward.
And Santa in the ghetto.
Having achieved this occasion with such splendor, Mr. Speaker, I invite you to adjourn this Honourable House until tomorrow at 2 o'clock when the Minister of Finance will close the debate and bring closure to an extremely important event over the past few weeks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The order, please. The motion is that the House be adjourned until tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. This House now stands adjourned until 2 o'clock tomorrow. All persons stand in their place until the mayor leave the House. Nobody move, please.
Yeah?
Bonnet man. Stand time to get up.